voicemail came on a Wednesday afternoon in early October while I was raking leaves in the backyard. I almost didn't check it. I'd been ignoring my phone more since Eleanor passed. Too many condolence calls that left me feeling emptier than before. But something made me stop, pull off my work gloves, and listen. It was Gerald Hutchins, the attorney who'd handled Eleanor's estate. I'd known Jerry for 15 years, back when Eleanor and I first moved to Bozeman. His voice on the message was careful, measured. The way doctors talk when they're about to tell you something they don't want to say over the phone. "Ray, it's Jerry. I need you to come by the office when you get a chance, sooner rather than later. It's about Eleanor. There's something I found going through the secondary documents. Please don't mention to the kids that we're meeting. Just you and me first." I stood there in the yard holding the phone, leaves piling against my boots in the wind. Eleanor had been gone 14 months. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. We had 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. 6 weeks to say everything we hadn't said in 43 years of marriage, which turned out to be less than either of us expected. Because we'd always been good at saying things when they mattered. Or so I thought. The next morning, I drove down to Jerry's office on Main Street. He met me at the door himself, which he'd never done before, and guided me to a chair across from his desk before he said anything. He placed a small, padded envelope in front of me, my name written in Eleanor's handwriting, the careful, deliberate cursive she used for important things. "She gave this to me 18 months ago," Jerry said, "before the diagnosis. She came in alone one afternoon and said if anything ever happened to her, I was to give this directly to you. Only to you. She was very specific about that." I looked at the envelope for a long moment before I picked it up. Inside was a folded piece of notepaper and a small USB drive held together with a rubber band. I unfolded the note. "Ray, I hope you never have to read this. But if you are, then something happened to me, and I need you to know what I know. I've been watching our daughter for 2 years. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who thinks the worst of her own child. But I saw things, Ray. Things I couldn't explain away. She and Owen have been talking about the house, about your retirement accounts, about how much you have and how long you'll be able to manage on your own. I overheard them last Christmas in the kitchen. They thought I was napping, but I was standing in the hallway and I heard everything," Owen said. "Once the old man can't keep up with the property, we make our move." And she laughed. Not an uncomfortable laugh. Not a surprised laugh. She laughed like they'd talked about it 100 times before. "There's more on the drive. I documented everything I could. Use it. I love you. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to say this to your face. You deserve better than that. You deserve better than what they're planning. Don't let them take what we built. Please. Eleanor." I set the letter down on Jerry's desk. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected them to shake. "Did you read this?" I asked. "No. It was sealed when she gave it to me." He paused. "But I'd like to help you, if you'll let me." I looked out the window at Main Street. Tourists walking past in October jackets, a couple sharing coffee outside the bakery across the road. Everything looked the same as it always had. "I need a few days," I said, "before I do anything." Jerry nodded. "Take your time. But Ray, don't mention the drive to anyone. Not until you know what's on it." I drove home the long way, through the canyon road where Eleanor and I used to hike on Sundays. The aspens had turned. Gold everywhere. Our house sat on 4 acres outside of town. Eleanor and I had built it in our early 50s after the kids were grown. 5 bedrooms, a workshop for me, a garden studio for her. We'd planned to grow old in it together. When she died, our daughter, I'll call her my daughter, because that's the only thing I still knew how to call her at that point, had offered to move back temporarily to help me manage the property. Her husband came too. Owen. That had been 8 months ago. They were still there. Our son lived in Missoula with his wife and 2 kids. He'd offered to come, but I'd told him I was fine. He had his own life, his own wykage, his own responsibilities. He took me at my word. Checked in by phone every Sunday. Visited every few months. That was the difference between my 2 children, though I hadn't understood what that difference meant until I read Eleanor's letter. That evening, I waited until my daughter and Owen had gone to their end of the house before I plugged the USB drive into my laptop in the study with the door locked. Eleanor had been thorough, more thorough than I had given her credit for, which made me feel ashamed that I'd never given her credit for it. There were photos, screenshots of text messages she'd somehow captured. I didn't know how, and maybe I didn't want to know. A document she typed up herself, dated entries going back almost 2 years. Small observations that individually meant nothing but together painted something clear and deliberate. March 2022, Stephanie asked again about the retirement accounts. Said she was just curious about how we had things structured. Third time in 6 months. July 2022, overheard Owen on the phone telling someone the property is worth at least 1.2. He didn't know I was in the garden. September 2022, she asked if we'd ever considered adding her name to the deed, just for estate planning purposes. I changed the subject. She brought it up again 3 days later. November 2022, the Christmas conversation. Hallway. Once the old man can't keep up with the property, we make our move. I went to see Jerry the following week. There was more. A lot more. I sat in my study until 2 a.m. reading everything Eleanor had saved. Then I closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and thought about my daughter at 17, driving to her first job. My daughter in her wedding dress, the way she'd squeezed my arm at the altar. My daughter at Eleanor's bedside in the final week, crying in a way that looked completely real. Maybe it was real. People can grieve and still be greedy. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. I thought about Eleanor writing those dated entries, quietly building a file over 2 years, never saying a word to me, because she was trying to be sure before she was damning, and then getting sick before she had the chance to say anything at all. So she handed it to Jerry and hoped for the best. She was always more careful than me, more patient. I called my son the next morning before anyone else was awake. I told him what I had. He was quiet for a long time. "How sure are you?" he finally asked. "Your mother was sure," I said. "That's enough for me." Another silence. Then, "What do you need?" "Nothing yet. Just wanted you to know." After I hung up, I sat with my coffee and made a list. The kind of list I used to make before a long project. Methodical, one step at a time. Jerry had already offered to help. I needed someone who could tell me whether what Eleanor had documented was enough to act on legally, and I needed to know what was actually happening with my accounts, because I realized I'd been hands-off about the finances since Eleanor died, deferring things I usually handled together with her, leaving gaps a careful person might notice and use. I called Jerry that afternoon and told him what was on the drive. He was quiet in the way that meant he was thinking through implications. "I know a woman," he said, "Beverly Crane. She handles financial elder law right here in Bozeman. She's also worked with a private investigator we've used for estate cases. If what Eleanor documented is accurate, you may have grounds for more than you think. But, Ray, before we do anything else, have you made any financial decisions since Eleanor passed? Any transfers, investments, anything you did at your daughter's suggestion?" I thought. "She asked me to move some money into a joint account last spring. Said it would make it easier to cover household expenses while they were staying with you. I did it. 40,000. Jerry exhaled slowly. "That's important. Don't move anything else. Don't sign anything. I'll set up the meeting with Beverly." Beverly Crane's office was on the second floor of a building near the university. She was in her late 50s, small and precise, with the kind of attention that makes you feel like she's cataloging everything you say. She looked through Eleanor's documentation for 40 minutes without speaking. Then she set it down and looked at me directly. "Your wife was meticulous," she said. "This alone isn't a criminal case, but combined with the joint account transfer and anything an investigator can document going forward, you'd have a very strong picture. The transfer especially, encouraging a vulnerable surviving spouse to consolidate funds in a shared account shortly after bereavement, is a recognized pattern in financial elder exploitation cases." She slid a business card across the desk. "Ted Bowen. He's former state police, works financial fraud cases exclusively now, very discreet." I took the card, looked at it for a moment. "If I do this," I said, "what does the end of it look like?" "For my daughter." Beverly didn't flinch. "That depends on what Ted finds and what you choose to pursue." Worst case for her, civil fraud claim, repayment of the 40,000 plus damages, potentially criminal referral if the intent is clear enough. Best case for her, you restructure your estate to protect herself. She gets nothing beyond what you choose to give her, and she knows why. And my grandchildren? Beverly's expression shifted just slightly. You can structure trusts specifically for them, separate from anything going to their parents, if that matters to you. It mattered to me. I told her so. Ted Bowen met me the following week at a diner out on the highway, away from town. He was heavy-set, gray-bearded, unhurried. He looked like someone's retired grandfather, which I suspected was useful in his line of work. He already knew the basics from Beverly. He asked me a series of careful questions about the household routine, who was home when, whether they used the property Wi-Fi on personal devices, whether my daughter had ever accessed my laptop or financial accounts. I realized as he was asking how much access they'd had. I'd been an open house since Eleanor died, trusting by habit, trusting by grief. The joint account, Ted said. Do you still have online access? Yes. Don't touch it. Don't move anything, and don't let on that you've noticed anything unusual. I need 4 to 6 weeks to build a picture of what they're doing. Can you keep things normal at home for that long? I thought about dinner conversations with my daughter, about Owen asked me if I'd thought any more about refinancing to free up capital, about how ordinary everything looked from the outside. Yes, I said, I can do that. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of my life, including the 6 weeks when Eleanor was dying. I came home every evening and sat at the dinner table with my daughter and her husband and listened. I asked questions I already knew the answers to. I let Owen explain things to me slowly, in the patient tone he used when he thought I wasn't following, and I nodded and said I'd think about it. In the 3rd week, my daughter suggested I change my will to add her as primary beneficiary. She framed it as a practical matter. Less paperwork eventually, Dad. Less burden on everyone. Owen backed her up with specific language about probate that he clearly had not looked up that afternoon. I said I'd talk to Jerry about it. Then I went to my study and wrote down the exact words they had used with the time and date. In the 5th week, Owen asked about the retirement accounts directly. He said he'd been talking to a financial advisor. He mentioned a name I didn't recognize, and there might be tax advantages to restructuring before the end of the year. Could I get him the account numbers so the advisor could take a look? I said I'd find them. I went to my study and called Ted. We're ready, Ted said. Come in tomorrow. What Ted had built over 6 weeks was not dramatic. It didn't need to be. My daughter had used our shared Wi-Fi to access financial research sites, asset valuation tools, Medicaid eligibility calculators, information on how trusts can be contested. She'd looked up the current value of our property 3 times in 2 months. Owen had contacted a real estate attorney in Bozeman about a family property situation. The attorney had declined to take the meeting but made a note, which Ted had obtained through professional channels. The $40,000 joint account had seen 2 attempted transfers out. Both declined when the receiving account flagged for review. My daughter had never mentioned those attempts to me, and there were the text messages. Obtained legally, Ted was careful to explain, between my daughter and her brother-in-law, her husband's brother, discussing timelines. He's slower than he was, probably 2 years before he really needs to move somewhere smaller. And Owen's reply, we don't need to wait that long if we play this right. I sat in Ted's office reading those messages and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and quieter than anger. The thing that comes after anger when you've had enough time to see clearly. What do I do now? I asked. That's Beverly's department, Ted said, but you have what you need. Beverly and Jerry worked together on the legal restructuring. It took 3 weeks. The joint account was closed. I transferred the funds back to my sole account, citing a routine account consolidation. My existing will was revoked and replaced with an irrevocable trust administered by a professional trust company in Billings. My retirement accounts named my son as sole beneficiary. Upon my death, the estate would be distributed as follows. My son would receive the property outright. My grandchildren, my daughter's 2 children, each received funded education trusts, controlled by an independent trustee until they turned 25. My daughter and Owen received nothing beyond the legal minimum required by Montana estate law. which in this case amounted to $1 each. The trust documentation included Eleanor's letter, the USB drive contents, and Ted's investigative report as supporting evidence of sound mind and documented concern. Beverly reviewed everything 3 times. "This will withstand a challenge," she told me. "They can try. They won't win." I chose a Sunday afternoon to have the conversation. My son drove in from Missoula. He'd offered to be there, and I'd accepted. I wanted a witness. I wanted someone in the room who knew the whole story. My daughter and Owen were in the living room when we came in. My son's presence surprised her. She looked between us twice, recalibrating something. I sat down and placed a folder on the coffee table. "I want to talk to you about the estate," I said, "and about some things your mother left behind." I read Eleanor's letter aloud, every word. I watched my daughter's face while I read it. She started with composed confusion, moved through something that might have been genuine distress, and arrived, by the end, at a careful stillness. When I finished, Owen said, She was sick, Ray. People say things." "Her name is Eleanor," I said. "And she wasn't confused when she wrote it. She wrote it 18 months before she died, before the diagnosis, when she was perfectly well." I opened the folder, set the printed pages on the table one at a time. The text messages, the failed transfer attempts, the real estate attorney inquiry, the dated entries Eleanor had kept for 2 years. The room was quiet for a long time. My daughter said finally, "Dad, I can explain." "You don't need to," I said. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you that the estate has been restructured. Everything is in trust. Jerry has the documents. There's nothing to contest and nothing to negotiate." Owen's jaw tightened. "You can't just." "I can," I said. "I did. Beverly Crane can explain the legal specifics if you want to pay someone to hear it." I looked at my daughter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "The kids are protected," I said. "The education trusts are funded and independent. Whatever happens between us doesn't touch them. I want you to know that." Something moved across her face then. I don't know what to call it. Maybe it was relief about the kids. Maybe it was shame, probably both. "You need to find somewhere else to live," I said. "I'll give you 60 days. That's more than fair." Owen started to say something about the 40,000. My son stood up from the chair by the window, which he'd been occupying quietly the whole time, and Owen stopped. 60 days, I repeated. They left the room. I could hear them talking in low, urgent voices down the hall. My son sat back down. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I will be." The 60 days were not peaceful. My daughter cycled through strategies the way Owen cycled through excuses, and I had the impression they were working from some kind of shared script they developed together. She tried grief. She came to my study one evening and cried about Eleanor, about the weight of losing her mother, about how the grief had made her do things she wasn't proud of. It was the most honest she'd been in months, and I almost reached for her. But I'd been reaching for her for 2 years, without knowing she was pulling something out of my pocket every time. Owen tried practical. He came to me with a counterproposal, a lease arrangement, a token monthly payment that represented about a quarter of fair market rent for the cottage they'd been occupying. I forwarded it to Jerry without responding. My daughter tried the grandchildren. She said my granddaughters were upset that they were asking questions she didn't know how to answer. I drove to Missoula that weekend and took them to the Children's Museum and the pizza place they loved, and I sat on the floor and built a block tower with my youngest granddaughter and thought about Eleanor's handwriting on that note, and felt, for the first time in months, that I was doing the right thing. In the final week, they stopped trying and started packing. I heard boxes being moved, drawers emptying, the heavy, specific silence of people who've accepted something. On day 60, I had Jerry come to the house. Official witness. They loaded a rented truck in the morning, my daughter moving quietly, Owen moving with the stiff efficiency of someone performing their dignity for an audience. By noon, the truck was full. My daughter knocked on my study door before they left. I opened it. We stood looking at each other for a moment. "I want to say something," she said. "All right." I did love her. She meant Eleanor. Whatever you think about the rest of it, I did love her. "I know," I said. And I did know. Both things can be true. That's one of the things I've learned in 67 years. That people can love you and still take from you if they've convinced themselves they deserve it. She nodded, walked down the hall. The front door opened and closed. I stood at the study window and watched the truck back down the driveway and turn onto the road and disappear. The property felt enormous in the weeks that followed. 4 acres is too much for one person, and I knew it. And Eleanor had probably known it too, had probably planned to gently suggest we downsize someday, when the time was right, in that careful, patient way she had. I started the process myself. Listed the property in March. Sold it in June, faster than I expected, to a family from Colorado with 3 kids and a dog. Watched them walk through the rooms Eleanor had designed, and felt something that wasn't quite sadness, not quite relief. I bought a 2-bedroom house closer to town, a 10-minute walk from the trailhead where Eleanor and I had spent our best Sunday mornings. I put the workshop tools in storage and set up a reading chair by the window, and found that was enough. My son called every Sunday. Sometimes he drove up with his family on weekends, and his kids ran through the smaller yard and made it feel full in a way that surprised me. My granddaughters, the ones who were now protected by trusts their mother couldn't touch, were growing up fast and loud and completely themselves. I hadn't heard from my daughter since moving day. I didn't expect to. I volunteered twice a week at the senior center, helping people navigate Medicare paperwork and benefit applications. Practical work, unglamorous, useful. Eleanor would have approved. On what would have been our 44th anniversary, I drove out to the cemetery and sat on the bench near her headstone for a while. The mountains were clear that day, the kind of autumn clarity that makes everything look close enough to touch. You were right about all of it, I said. I should have seen it myself. I didn't. But you made sure I'd see it eventually. That was you, always thinking 3 steps ahead. I pulled out a copy of her letter. I'd had it laminated, same as everything else that mattered. Read it one more time in her handwriting. I sat there for a long time. Birds, wind, the mountains not going anywhere. On the way home, I stopped at the little hardware store on the edge of town, the one that smells like sawdust and machine oil, and bought some supplies for a small shelf I'd been meaning to build. Something useful, something with my hands, something Eleanor would have found a place for on the wall, and said, "See, I knew you'd get back to it." That evening, I built the shelf, hung it in the hallway, set 2 photos on it. Eleanor and me at the top of a trail we'd hiked every summer for 20 years, and my son's family at Christmas, the grandkids red-faced and laughing in ugly sweaters. I stood back and looked at it for a minute. Then I went to the kitchen and made dinner for one, and the house was quiet, and it was mine. I think about Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table 2 years before she died, quietly opening a document on her laptop, typing the date, and writing down something small she'd noticed that day. Not telling me, not making accusations, just watching and writing and saving. That image stays with me more than almost anything else from this whole ordeal. The patience it took, the discipline, the love underneath the discipline. She could have come to me. I've asked myself why she didn't, and I think I know the answer. She wasn't sure yet, and she didn't want to be wrong about her own daughter. That's not weakness. That's integrity. She held herself to a standard of proof before she was willing to say something that couldn't be unsaid. Most people, when they suspect someone they love, either explode too early or never say anything at all. Eleanor didn't either. She waited until she knew, and then she made sure I would know too, even if she wasn't there to tell me herself. I didn't have that kind of patience. I had to learn it during those 6 weeks of sitting at the dinner table, listening to Owen explain things to me slowly like I was losing my mind, nodding and saying I'd think about it. Every evening I went to my study and wrote down what had been said, date, time, exact words. I borrowed Eleanor's method because it was the right one. There is something clarifying about that kind of documentation. It keeps you from convincing yourself you imagined it, and it keeps you from acting on feeling alone when you need to act on fact. What my daughter and Owen were doing had a logic to it. That's the part that's hardest to sit with. They weren't random or impulsive. They had timelines. They had language, estate planning, tax advantages, just to simplify things. They'd thought it through carefully enough to be patient themselves, to play a long game. That kind of calculated behavior towards someone who trusted you completely is its own kind of answer. You can't stumble into that. You choose it repeatedly over years. And choices like that compound. Not in some abstract cosmic sense, just practically causally. The 40,000 moved into a joint account came back with interest in the form of a fraud finding. The text messages about timelines became evidence of intent. Every small move they made toward taking something that wasn't theirs built the case that eventually protected everything they had been reaching for. I'm 67 years old. I've made plenty of mistakes in business, in parenting, in the years I was too busy to notice what Eleanor was quietly carrying. What I know now that I didn't know then is that clear thinking is not a gift some people have and others don't. It's something you build by being honest about what you see, even when what you see is inconvenient. Eleanor built it over a lifetime. Ted Bowen built it into a profession. I had to build it fast, in grief, under pressure. What got me through was the same thing that got Eleanor through, deciding that what was true mattered more than what was comfortable. That the people who deserve protecting, my grandchildren, my son, Eleanor's memory, were worth the discomfort of seeing things clearly and acting on what I saw. The shelf I built that last evening is still in the hallway. Nothing special about it. 2 photos, some books. But I built it myself, with my hands, after everything was over, and it's straight and solid, and it's going to stay up for a long time. That's enough. Sometimes, that's exactly enough.